It's also important to understand that theory and research work together. Theory guides the research methods and research design. It's more or less a starting point. But it doesn't stand alone because theory must be tested, which requires research. And as sociologists do research, often coming up with surprising findings, those results must be explained. For that, we need theory. As sociologists study social life, then they combine research and theory. Now, hopefully you see a little bit of a chicken and an egg argument here. You can't build theory without real-world evidence and data to prove that it's right, and you can't know what data to collect or how to build your research project without valid theory to guide it. An essential aspect of sociology is that it's testable and verifiable. Common sense may seem intuitively accurate, but science allows for an objective inquiry and creates a structure to test theories and identify fallacies. The research model allows the scientist to systematically inquire, collect data, and test theories. These are the steps for scientific research. They occur in a specific order, and each step must individually demonstrate scientific rigor in order for the model to be considered valid. The model always follows these basic 8 steps. Another way to look at the model is to understand that there are different kinds of research methods. If you're a sociology major, you'll take an entire course in understanding the various methods. I think at one point or another, most of us have participated in some kind of survey, which collects responses from a consistent set of questions for different respondents and compares those responses. Participant observation, for example, allows the researcher to be involved in an activity while gathering data. Or case studies look in depth at the history of different types of events and gathers information about the situation and discusses the social dynamics. Or content analysis, also called sometimes analysis of documents. That will gather information from things like magazines or television shows or other documents or media pieces to determine trends and messages in those documents. And again, we can see from this diagram that research is never over. The results will beg more questions or similar studies to determine if the findings are valid across different cultures or different times. A very basic concept is the understanding of the average of something. What is the baseline for the population? What is the norm? Is often thought of as the average. But there are different ways of measuring the average. We have the mean, the median, and the mode. The mean is the average of all numbers. Add them up, divide by how many numbers were added, and that's your mean. The median is the middle number, and the mode is the number that occurs the most. For this number sequence, you see that the average is different depending on whether you are using the mean, the median, or the mode. Scientists rely heavily on data, and that data is often presented in tables, particularly numerical tables. So it's important to know how to read a table. The title will state the topic, and it's at the top. The headnote will give a little more detailed information about that data. The source will give information on where the data came from and should allow you to locate the original source in case you want verification or want to use the data for one of your own research projects. There are different research methods as listed on this slide. Let's talk briefly about them. Social surveys are typically structured questionnaires that are designed to collect information from large numbers of people in a very standardized form. Social surveys are written in advance by the researcher and tend to be pre-coded and have a limited number of closed-ended questions, and they tend to focus on relatively simple topics. A good example is the U.S. Census. Participant observation involves the researcher joining a group of people, taking an active part in their day-to-day lives as a member of that group, and making in-depth recordings of what he or she sees. And participant observation may be overt, in which case the respondents know that the researcher is conducting sociological research, or covert, meaning undercover, where the respondents are deceived into thinking the researcher is one of them. They don't know the researcher is conducting research. And case studies involves researching a single case or an example of something using multiple methods. For example, researching one school or one factory. An ethnography is simply a very in-depth case study, and participant observation may be overt, in which case the respondents know that the researcher is conducting sociological research, or covert, meaning undercover, where the respondents are deceived into thinking the researcher is one of them. They don't know the researcher is conducting research. Secondary analysis is when the researcher analyzes data that someone else has already collected. You would be doing secondary analysis, for example, if you were to use the U.S. Census Bureau data to examine trends over time. That would be secondary analysis. Analysis of documents will consider recorded sources. To investigate social life, they examine such diverse sources as books, newspapers, diaries, bank records, police reports, immigration files, and records kept by organizations. The term documents is so broad that it includes video and audio recordings, even Facebook, which sociologists have used to study the race and ethnicity of friendships among college students. Experiments aim to measure as precisely as possible the effect which one variable has on another, aiming to establish cause and effect relationships between those variables. Experiments typically start off with a hypothesis, a theory or an explanation made on the basis of limited evidence as a starting point for further investigation, and will typically take the form of a testable statement about the effect which one or more independent variables will have on the dependent variable. A good experiment will be designed in such a way that objective cause and effect relationships can be established, so that the original hypothesis can be verified or rejected and modified. When gathering data, it's critical to use unobtrusive measures, meaning that the person that is being observed does not know that they are observed. This is because when people are observed, they don't always engage in behavior that's entirely normal. There's an effect on behavior when the observer is present and their presence is known to the subject. There are several basic steps to the survey method of research. Even before you draft questions, one must determine what is a representative sample. This is a big issue in survey research. A great example of results being skewed from the general population are phone surveys. The population may not be representative if you factor in that you're calling people that have phones. For instance, those that don't have a phone are excluded. That the researcher is talking to people that answer the phone and talking to people that will engage in the survey. You can see how that could self-select for a certain segment of the population and not necessarily be representative of the population as a whole. The answers are also dependent on the rapport that the interviewer has with the subject, particularly if the responses are sensitive in nature. Survey questions can be either open-ended or closed-ended. An example of an open-ended question would be, describe the weather today, whereas a closed-ended question might be, was it rainy or overcast today? So with a closed-ended question, the subject gives a predetermined response, this or that, or from a list of answers supplied by the interviewer. And the open-ended questions allow the subject to answer using their own words and descriptions. Another research design decision in surveys is whether an interviewer should ask the questions or whether the subject should be given the questions in written form or might respond via a recorded cue like a cue system on a phone or respond via a computer. The basic choice here is, should a person be involved in the interview process or should it be automated? There are pros and cons to each. Automated systems or paper questionnaires provide privacy, and many people like it. However, some prefer a live interviewer even for sensitive areas of their lives. They say they want positive feedback from interviewers, and the engagement from another person may prompt more accurate and thorough responses. Here's an example of the same question in both the closed-ended and the open-ended formats. Which do you think would get the most accurate information? Which might be easier to tabulate and code for comparison of responses? Which would you prefer to answer if you were a respondent?